Welcome to Midnight and Murder, a true crime series for sleeping, where true crime meets calm and mystery meets the mind at rest. Let's go. Story 1, Cedar Hollow. It was October 12th, 1995 in Cedar Hollow, a sleepy Appalachian town where the autumn air tasted like wood smoke and apple cider. The town's heartbeat was slow, predictable, school buses kicking up leaves, the diner's bell jingling as regulars shuffled in for coffee, and the nightly news crackling over a single TV station. But that rhythm shattered when 17-year-old Lila Marsh vanished after her shift at the Red Owl grocery store. Lila was a senior at Cedar Hollow High, a quiet girl with a passion for birdwatching and a Walkman permanently glued to her ears. She'd been seen locking up the store at 10:15 p.m., her red raincoat glowing under the flickering street lamp. By 10:30, she was gone. Her sneakers were found at the edge of the woods behind the shop, half buried in damp leaves. No signs of struggle, no fingerprints, just a single crow feather tucked into the shoelaces. Detective Harold Voss, a 58-year-old with a face like weathered leather and a pack-a-day cigarette habit, led the investigation. He'd grown up in Cedar Hollow, knew every back road and gossip, but this case was different. Lila's parents, both teachers, were pillars of the community. There were no obvious suspects. The town mobilized. Volunteers combed the woods. Flyers with Lila's photo, pale face, dark curls, a gap-toothed smile, plastered every telephone pole. But weeks passed, then months. Theories bloomed like mold in the dark. Runaway. Lila had argued with her mom about college applications days prior. Abduction. A stranger's car had been spotted near the store that night, though no one could agree on the make or color. The Hollow. Locals whispered about an old mining tunnel beneath the woods, a place where voices echoed backward. Detective Voss dismissed the rumors. He was a man of facts until he found the notebook. In 1998, 3 years after Lila's disappearance, a hiker stumbled upon a waterlogged backpack in a creek near the woods. Inside was a spiral-bound notebook, its pages warped but legible. Lila's handwriting filled the margins, sketches of birds, quotes from Emily Dickinson, and a recurring doodle of a crow perched on a clock. But the final entry chilled Voss. "He knows I saw him. The tunnel. The red light. I have to tell someone before—" The sentence cut off mid-ink blot. The tunnel reference reignited interest. Cedar Hollow's mining tunnels had been sealed in the 1950s after a collapse, but old-timers remembered a network of smaller shafts used during the coal boom. Voss tracked down 82-year-old Earl Grady, a retired miner who muttered, "There's one under the old mill, caved in 62, rotten wood overhead. Dangerous." Undeterred, Voss secured a search warrant. On November 5th, 1998, a team of deputies and spelunkers pried open the mill's cellar door. The air inside was thick, tasting of iron and rot. Flashlights revealed a narrow passage, its walls scarred with pickaxe marks. And then they found it. A chamber lined with candles, a mattress, and Lila's Red Owl name tag, rusted shut around a crow feather. The discovery made headlines. Theories exploded. Had Lila been lured there, kidnapped, or had she fled voluntarily? But without a body, the case remained unsolved. In 2003, a new lead emerged. A woman named Marjorie Dale, serving a drug sentence in Ohio, confessed to her cellmate that her brother had taken a girl in '95. The tip reached Voss, now retired and battling emphysema. He drove to the prison, notebook in hand. Marjorie described her brother, Clyde Dale, a drifter with a record for assault, who'd vanished in 1996. "He had a thing for birdwatchers," she spat, "said they were quiet, easy to control." She led Voss to a storage locker Clyde had rented in Knoxville. Inside, a moth-eaten parka matching Lila's description, a Walkman with a mangled cassette tape, and a map of Cedar Hollow's tunnels, annotated in red ink. The tape, cleaned by a forensic lab, revealed faint voices. "You shouldn't have looked down there, Lila. You shouldn't have—" A scream, static, then silence. Clyde Dale became the prime suspect, but he disappeared after Lila's disappearance. Voss spent his final years chasing shadows, dying in 2010 with the case still open. Enter Emily Torres, a 24-year-old podcast producer from Chicago. In 2020, her true crime series, Buried Echoes, revitalized interest in Lila's case. Emily was obsessed, not just professionally, but personally. Her childhood home had been blocks from the Red Owl, and she remembered Lila tutoring her in algebra. Emily re-interviewed everyone. Lila's best friend, who admitted Lila had weird dreams about the tunnel, the store manager, who recalled a creepy guy buying gum the night Lila vanished, and Earl Grady's grandson, who shared a local legend. The tunnel's a mirror. If you shout your secret there, it whispers back. But Emily's breakthrough came via TikTok. A genealogy buff traced Clyde Dale's movements to Brazil, Indiana, where he died in a car crash in 2001. His belongings included a Polaroid of a young woman with Lila's gap-toothed smile, though her hair was dyed platinum. Was she alive? A prisoner? A ghost? Emily dug deeper. She uncovered a 1996 police report from Brazil. A runaway named Jane Doe had been admitted to a mental hospital, claiming a man in the woods told her to forget her name. The woman fled before treatment. The threads tangled. Was Jane Doe Lila? Had she been manipulated into amnesia? Or was this a cruel coincidence? In 2022, Emily pooled her savings and hired a crew to excavate the tunnel chamber. They found a hollow beneath the mattress, a crawl space leading to a second room. Inside, a child's sneaker, size 7 Lila's, a jar of preserved fireflies, Lila's childhood hobby, and a journal dated 1995-1996. The journal entries were chilling. He says I'm safe here, but the walls move when I sleep. I hear her, the girl before me. Her name was Mandy. She's stuck in the walls. If you find this, tell my mom I'm sorry. I tried to leave. The crow won't let me. Forensic analysis matched the handwriting to Lila's school assignments. Then, a break. A retired social worker revealed Mandy Vega, a 16-year-old who disappeared in 1989 from a neighboring town. Her case had gone cold, until now. The tunnel, it seemed, had a history. Emily cross-referenced missing persons across Appalachia. 7 girls total, all between 1978 and 1995, all last seen near wooded areas with mining tunnels. Lila was Clyde Dale's final victim, or so they thought. In 2023, Cedar Hollow held a memorial for Lila and Mandy, their names etched onto a stone beside the woods. Emily's podcast had raised $200 Silkide for a nonprofit to search for the remaining girls. But the final twist came from an unexpected source. AI facial recognition. A genealogy website matched Lila's DNA from her brother's saliva sample to a woman in Oregon named Clara Hayes, who died in 2019. Her obituary listed no family. Her journal, found in her belongings, explained, I tried to forget. I cut my hair, moved west, married a man who never asked questions. But the dreams never stopped. The crow's voice, Mandy's voice. I'm sorry, Mom. I'm sorry I couldn't come home. Clara Lila had escaped Clyde Dale in 1996, suffering a head injury that erased her memories. By the time fragments returned, she believed herself Clara, a foster kid with a tragic past. She never knew she'd been a headline. Her brother, now 45, wept at her grave. She was right here, he whispered. All this time, she was right here. Cedar Hollow changed after the truth surfaced. The tunnel was filled with concrete. The Red Owl became a community center for missing persons' families. A mural of Lila and Mandy now graces the high school wall, their hands holding a crow feather and a compass. Detective Voss's notes, donated to the town archives, end with a scribbled quote from Dickinson. Hope is the thing with feathers that perches in the soul and sings the tune without the words and never stops at all. Story 2, The Light at the Edge of the Fog. September 3, 1993. The coastal town of Greyhaven, Maine was a place of lobster boats and salt-crusted cottages, where the wind always carried the tang of seaweed. At its edge stood the Hawk's Nest Lighthouse, a 100-year-old tower painted battleship gray, its beams slicing through the fog like a searchlight for secrets. Eleanor Ellie Vorn, 32, was the lighthouse's caretaker. A former journalist turned recluse after her husband's death, she lived alone in the keeper's cottage, tending the light and scribbling in journals no one ever read. Locals called her the Widow of the Rocks. On the night she disappeared, Ellie was seen locking the lighthouse at 9 p.m., her woolen coat flapping in the wind. The fog was thick enough to drown the stars. By dawn, the cottage door hung open, her teacup frozen mid-sip on the desk. The lighthouse beam spun wildly, its mechanism jammed with a rusted wrench. No signs of struggle, no footprints in the mud. Just Ellie's flashlight flickering on the cliffside path, its beam pointing seaward. The Coast Guard scoured the cove. Divers plunged into the icy water. Nothing. But then came the note. 3 days later, a fisherman found a Ziploc bag tangled in his nets. Inside, a journal page, water-warped but legible. Ellie's handwriting. He's here, the man in the tower. Not a ghost, a keeper of something worse. If you find this, burn the light. The words ignited panic. Locals whispered about the Hawk's Nest curse, a legend claiming the lighthouse had swallowed souls since the 1800s. Ellie's case joined the lore, fading into cold storage by 1995. Enter Detective Marcus Cole, a 40-year-old with a coffee addiction and a knack for lost causes. A transplant from Boston, he'd taken the Greyhaven job to escape a failed marriage. But Ellie's file haunted him. Why had no one revisited the case? He started with the journal page. Ellie's handwriting matched samples from her tax returns. Her final entry mentioned a man in the tower, but the lighthouse had been automated since 1988. No keepers needed. Marcus interviewed retirees who remembered Ellie. Mabel, the postmistress. She'd get weird letters, sealed with wax, no return address. Tommy, a deckhand, saw her arguing with a guy in a black truck last summer. He had a scar down his cheek. Father O'Leary. She asked me about exorcism, said the lighthouse wasn't a home anymore. A scarred man, occult whispers, a truck never found. Marcus dug deeper. Ellie's husband, Daniel, had died in a solo sailing accident in 1990. The Coast Guard blamed a rogue wave, but Ellie's journals, released by her estate, hinted at suspicion. Daniel's compass was broken. Who sails blind into a storm? Coincidence? Marcus didn't think so. In 2001, a storm tore down the lighthouse's outer wall, revealing a hidden compartment in the tower's base. Inside, Ellie's missing journals, sealed in a metal lockbox. The entries were frantic. The light isn't just light, it's a signal. He uses it to call them. November 5th, the date repeats. 1873, 1908, 1941, 1993. Something wakes then sleeps. If I cut the beam, will they take me too? But the final journal held her obsession. A cipher. Page after page of numbers and symbols, annotated with phrases like, the coordinates lie in the tides, and key Psalm 91, 6. Amateur sleuths online tried to crack it for years. No luck. Then in 2020, a breakthrough. A retired cryptographer named Dr. Leila Hahn noticed Ellie's cipher mirrored a 19th century Navy code used to map smuggling routes. Cross-referencing it with Greyhaven's title charts, she found a match. A cluster of coordinates pointing to Skull Rock, a jagged islet offshore. Marcus, now gray-haired and nearing retirement, rallied a team. They braved the rocks at low tide and found a sea cave, its walls carved with symbols identical to Ellie's journals. At the cave's rear, a rusted chest. Inside, a shock. Daniel Vaughan's dive watch, still ticking, and a letter penned in his hand. If you're reading this, I'm dead. The light, it lures you, literally pulls the boat off course. I tried to warn Ellie. She thinks it's a man, but it's the tower itself. It's alive. Enter Aisha Patel, a 19-year-old MIT freshman and podcaster, vanished, the Ellie Vaughan enigma. In 2022, she cross-referenced Ellie's November 5th dates with maritime records. Each year, a ship had wrecked near Greyhaven on that date, dating back to 1873. What force targets this coast every 33 years? Aisha enlisted a geophysicist who discovered a magnetic anomaly beneath the lighthouse, a pocket of lodestone new Ki-Ewing compasses and GPS. The scarred man from Tommy's memory? A geologist named Royce Crenshaw, who drilled there in 1992, searching for rare minerals. His permit was signed by a shell company linked to Daniel's insurance policy. Royce had vanished in 1994. A breakthrough came via LiDAR scanning. Beneath the lighthouse ruins lay a network of tunnels, leading to the cave. Ellie had drawn them in her journals. In 2023, excavators dug. They found human remains in the tunnels, 6 sets dating to each November 5th wreck. Among them, a Civil War-era captain's log describing a beacon of hunger that lured his ship ashore. The lighthouse, it seemed, had been built atop a natural magnetic freak. Over centuries, its light, amplified by the lodestone, became a siren song for sailors. Keepers who stayed too long heard voices, their minds unraveling. Daniel had discovered this. Ellie had tried to stop it. But what of the man in the tower? Royce's skeleton was found in the beam room, his skull crushed by a falling gear. His final journal entry? The light's not a magnet, it's a beacon for something older. I heard it whisper. It wants the tide's offerings. Marcus Cole stood at the lighthouse ruins on November 5th, 2023, the 30th anniversary of Ellie's disappearance. Aisha beside him, clutching her recorder. "We're here to close the loop," he said. The town had voted to demolish the tower, its curse too ingrained. As explosives were set, Marcus placed Ellie's journals into the chest at Skull Rock, alongside Daniel's watch. That night, the beam fired one last time, a pulse seen for miles, before the detonation reduced the tower to rubble. Locals claimed the foghorn sounded at dawn, though none remained to work it. But the data told a stranger tale. Seismographs recorded a 3.2 magnitude tremor offshore at the moment of collapse. The lodestone pocket had destabilized, collapsing into the earth. No ships wrecked that night, or the next. Ellie and Daniel are buried side by side in Greyhaven Cemetery, their headstone facing the sea. Aisha's podcast won a Peabody Award. Marcus retired, writing a memoir titled The Light That Lied. And the cipher, decrypted fully in 2024, its final message read, "To the one who finds this, the tower was never haunted. We were the ghosts clinging to a thing we couldn't understand. Forgive us and turn off the light." Story 3, Blackwater Lake. Blackwater Lake, nestled in the pine forest of northern Michigan, was the kind of place where time slowed. In the summer of '94, teenagers gathered at its shores to drink warm beer, dare each other to swim to the Ghost Rock at dusk, and repeat the local legend, "If you see the ship, you'll vanish by dawn." 17-year-old Jamie Ross didn't believe in ghosts. A scholarship-bound senior with a Walkman permanently glued to his ears, he worked as a lifeguard at the lake's public beach. But on July 19, 1994, Jamie vanished after his shift. His red canoe was found adrift at dawn, its oars missing. The only clue? A frantic 911 call he'd made at 10:47 p.m. "There's a boat here. It shouldn't be here. The lights, they're wrong. It's pulling me." Static. "Into the lake." The call cut off. Detective Marla Green, a no-nonsense investigator with a reputation for cold cases, took the lead. She was skeptical of the phantom ship rumors, but couldn't ignore the patterns. Blackwater Lake's archives were littered with disappearances. 1964, a couple vanished after reporting strange lights on the water. 1934, a boy disappeared after claiming he'd boarded a silver ship. 1894, a newspaper article described a steamboat crew who rode into the fog and never returned. Each case occurred in July every 30 years. Jamie's mother handed Marla his journal, found in his backpack. A single page was circled. "Mom says the stories are just myths, but tonight I saw it. A ship with no sails, glowing green." It hummed like a TV. If you're reading this, it's real. Marla's investigation stalled until 2007, when a diver exploring the lake's depths found a rusted lockbox tied to an anchor. Inside, a child's diary from 1934 and a hand-drawn map of the lake bed, marked with an X near the eastern cliffs. The diary entries were chilling. "The ship took Tommy. It has windows like eyes. Mama says I'm lying. The man in the coat comes every July. He smiles, but his eyes are dead." The map led Marla to consult Dr. Henry Cho, a hydrologist. He revealed Blackwater Lake had a sinkhole beneath its eastern shore, a labyrinth of underwater caves. "Perfect for hiding bodies," he muttered. But the real breakthrough came in 2019, when a TikToker named Kayla Cruz filmed herself exploring the lake's abandoned lighthouse. In the background, her video captured faint radio static. Then a voice. Jamie Ross, July 19th, 1994. Coordinates 45 degrees 12N, 85 degrees 3W. The coordinates pointed to the sinkhole. Marla, now retired, partnered with Kayla. Together, they analyzed the voice using audio forensics. The signal matched 1930 S-era CB radio frequencies. In 2021, a sonar scan of the sinkhole revealed an anomaly, a 60-foot vessel buried in silt. Divers recovered it, a 19th century schooner, its hull intact but its nameplate missing. Inside they found a rusted sextant etched with initials, JR 1894. Dozens of personal items, pocket watches, hairpins, and a 1960s transistor radio. Human remains, at least 20 sets, spanning centuries. The ship wasn't a ghost, it was a trap. Forensic anthropologist Dr. Amina Patel linked the remains to missing persons from 1894, 1934, 1964, and 1994. But how had the schooner stayed preserved? And who or what had used it to lure victims? The answer lay in Jamie's journal. The lighthouse, decommissioned in 1972, had been manned until then by a reclusive man named Elias Thorne. Townsfolk described him as odd but harmless, a Civil War buff who lived alone with his books. Marla tracked down Elias's nephew, who revealed a shocking truth. Elias had died in 1964, but someone had been posing as him ever since. The imposter? A man named Victor Hale, a former Navy engineer obsessed with time's cyclical nature. In 1964, Victor had faked Elias's death, taken his identity, and begun his work. Victor's journals, found in the lighthouse's hidden crawlspace, detailed his plan. He'd discovered the schooner in 1959, sunk it in the sinkhole, and rigged it with lights and sound equipment to mimic a ghost ship. Using fog, audio illusions, and a CB radio, he'd lure victims to their deaths, staging disappearances every 30 years to match the legend. His motive? A delusional belief that sacrifices would let him step outside time. Jamie had survived long enough to document Victor's tricks before drowning in 1994. But Victor's fate? In 1994, he'd vanished himself. His final journal entry: "The lake wants more. It's hungry. I've fed it. Why won't it let me go?" His remains were found in the schooner's hold, his skull crushed by a falling mast. In 2024, Kayla and Marla held a memorial at the lake, scattering Jamie's ashes alongside those of the other victims. The lighthouse, now a museum, displays Victor's journals in a plaque. "To those lost to the myth and those who kept it alive, may the lake remember your names." As night fell, Kayla's radio crackled, the same voice from her video. "Jamie Ross, July 19th, 1994, it's over." The signal faded. Blackwater Lake is calm now. The sinkhole is sealed, the schooner displayed in a Michigan museum. Locals still tell the ghost ship story, but now it ends with a footnote: "Beware the man behind the legend." Story 4, The Dial-Up Phantom. In the fall of 1996, the sleepy town of Greystone, Vermont, was a patchwork of covered bridges, apple orchards, and one of the first municipal fiber optic networks in New England. The project was the brainchild of 34-year-old Ethan Cole, a reclusive software engineer who'd moved to town 2 years earlier to escape the Bay Area's dot-com frenzy. Ethan lived alone in a converted Victorian mansion on Route 22, where he worked on Project Echo, a classified program for the state's emergency alert system. Neighbors described him as quiet but friendly, a man who left Tupperware of brownies on their porches and played Debussy on his porch piano at dusk. Then on October 12, 1996, Ethan vanished. His house was locked from the inside. His computer, a tower running Windows 95 with a blinking modem, was still on, its screen frozen on a terminal window reading, "Error 404, file not found." But the strangest detail? A printout on his desk, a string of numbers and letters, circled in red ink. XK8LM2ZQ5VR9. Detective Lila Hart, a 38-year-old skeptic with a penchant for trench coats and Marlboros, led the investigation. She'd cut her teeth on missing persons cases in the 80s and had no patience for the tech mysticism swirling around Ethan's disappearance. But even she couldn't explain the calls. Every night at 2:17 a.m., the Greystone Police Department's fax machine would word a life, spitting out a single page of garbled text. The paper always smelled faintly of ozone. Ethan's computer was sent to a forensics lab in Boston, where analysts discovered a hidden partition labeled Project Echo _ backup. Inside was a trove of files, schematics for the town's fiber network, audio recordings of emergency broadcasts, and a link to a bulletin board system, BBS, called the WhisperNet. BBSs were relics by 1996, dial-up communities where hackers and hobbyists traded code and conspiracy theories. But the WhisperNet was different. To access it, users had to input a specific string of coordinates in a phrase from Shakespeare. The Ethan-linked forum Echoes contained cryptic posts signed XK8. The network sees you. Trust the static. Route 22 is a loop. All loops have knots. They're listening through the landlines. Detective Hart traced the BBS server to a decommissioned Cold War-era bunker beneath Greystone's old train station. When officers raided it, they found a tangle of servers humming under a foot of dust and a framed photo pinned to the wall. It showed Ethan smiling beside a man in a military uniform. The man's face had been scratched out with a knife. In 2009, a teenager named Marcus Lee stumbled upon the WhisperNet while researching 90s internet history. A self-proclaimed tech archaeologist, Marcus became obsessed with Ethan's case. He reverse-engineered the BBS's encryption and discovered a subforum titled Knots, filled with audio files. The files were eerie, distorted voices reading coordinates, a child humming Twinkle Twinkle, and a 12-minute loop of static. But one clip stood out, a woman's voice saying, "The loop is a trap. Break the signal at 2:17. Marcus cross-referenced the timestamps with Ethan's disappearance. October 12, 1996, at 2:17 a.m. was the exact moment Ethan's modem had disconnected from the BBS. He also found a connection to the 1983 disappearance of Dr. Evelyn Marsh, a physicist who'd worked on a classified military project at the Greystone bunker. Her final paper? Resonant Frequencies in Underground Fiber Optics. Detective Hart, now retired, was dragged back into the case in 2011 when Marcus's research went viral. The two met at the Greystone Diner, where Marcus slid a flash drive across the table. "I ran a spectral analysis on the BBS static. It matches a frequency used by the military in the 80s for psychological operations." Ethan didn't vanish, he was broadcast. Hart rolled her eyes but agreed to revisit the bunker. They found a corroded terminal buried under rubble, its keyboard sticky with age. Marcus typed XK8LM2ZQ5VR9, the code from Ethan's printout. The screen flickered to life. "Welcome, Echo, transmission resuming." A file named final_loop played. Ethan's voice panicked. "They used the fiber network as an antenna. The frequency, it phased me out of sync. I'm here but not here. If you hear this, shut down Route 22's power grid at 2:17. It's the only way to—" The recording cut off with a shriek. On October 12, 2012, 16 years to the night, Hart and Marcus cut power to Greystone's grid at 2:16 a.m. The town went black. For 60 seconds, the only sound was the wind. Then a flash. At the edge of Route 22, a tree split open, its core glowing faintly. Inside, they found Ethan, alive. He was gaunt, his hair streaked white, but coherent. "The signal trapped me in a feedback loop. I aged, but not right." He clutched a notebook filled with equations. The military used Greystone to test quantum displacement. Evelyn was their first test subject. I was the second. Ethan's body was intact, but his mind had been scattered across the network. He'd woken up in 2001, 2005, 2009, briefly materializing to post on the WhisperNet before dissolving again. The final twist came from the scratched-out man in the bunker photo. In 2014, the FBI raided a defense contractor in Maryland and found files on Project Echo. The man was Colonel Thomas Voss, who died in a 1999 plane crash. His last journal entry: "The displacement works, but the subjects resist. Ethan's code is a virus. He'll unravel everything." Ethan died in 2015, his body finally succumbing to the decades lost. His notebooks were donated to MIT, where a professor used them to pioneer quantum encryption. The Greystone fiber network was dismantled, But some swear the BBS still flickers on a line during thunderstorms. Call it a ghost story. Call it science. As you drift off, imagine the static fading, the modem's hum dissolving into rain, and somewhere a final message looping in the dark. Transmission ended. Good night. Story 5. The Static of Station 12. It was March 3rd, 1997, in the Rust Belt town of Iron Ridge, Pennsylvania, a place where the air smelled of coal dust, and the only nightlife was the 24-hour diner on Route 88. At the edge of town stood Station 12, a low-power FM radio station run out of a converted auto shop by 28-year-old DJ Marcus Hale. Marcus was a local legend. His late-night show, Midnight Echoes, was a mix of obscure alt-rock, conspiracy theories, and listener calls from insomniacs across the tri-state area. He spoke in a voice like gravel and honey, the kind that made you lean closer to the speaker. Regulars swore he knew things he shouldn't, like when a listener's dog had died or when a snowstorm would hit hours before the forecast. Then on March 3rd, Marcus vanished mid-broadcast. The show had been airing live. Listeners heard him say, "You hear that? Static." But it's not static. It's a voice. It's calling my name. I have to. A burst of feedback, then silence. The station's engineer, a teenager named Danny Ruiz, rushed to the studio. The door was locked from the inside. The microphone was still hot, but Marcus was gone. The only clue? A cassette tape left on the mixing board, labeled in Sharpie, "The Loop." Detective Naomi Reyes, a 35-year-old with a reputation for solving cases that baffled her colleagues, took the lead. She grew up in Iron Ridge, knew the town's rhythms. But this case was different. The cassette was analyzed by a forensics lab in Pittsburgh. It contained 43 minutes of audio. First 20 minutes, a loop of Marcus's voice reading listener emails, identical to the night's broadcast. Next 18 minutes, a low rhythmic tone like a heartbeat. Final 5 minutes, a woman's voice, whispering in a language no one recognized. Linguists identified fragments of Old Hungarian and Navajo, but the syntax was off, like it was spoken by someone who'd only heard it in dreams, one expert noted. Detective Reyes tracked the tape's origin to a now-defunct electronics store in Cleveland. The owner recalled selling 50 blank cassettes to a man in a leather jacket in February 1997. The man paid cash and left a fingerprint on the receipt. It matched Marcus. But why would he buy his own tape? In 2005, a college student named Aisha Patel posted a 10-minute YouTube video titled "The Midnight Echoes Mystery." Was Marcus Hale abducted? It went viral, sparking renewed interest. Aisha, a self-taught audio engineer, reverse-engineered the heartbeat on the tape. She discovered it wasn't a heartbeat at all. It was a radio frequency used by the U.S. military in the 1960s for subliminal messaging experiments. The woman's voice was a reversed message. They are listening through the wires. Aisha's video caught the attention of Danny Ruiz, now a software developer in Seattle. He revealed a secret. Marcus had been experimenting with voice-to-skull technology, a Cold War-era project that beamed audio directly into a person's skull using microwave pulses. Marcus had joked about it on air. Ever heard a voice in your head that wasn't yours? Blame the Soviets. Detective Reyes reopened the case in 2008, armed with Aisha's findings. She returned to Station 12, now abandoned and overgrown with ivy. Inside, she found Marcus's old notebook, hidden beneath the floorboards. The entries were frantic. They're using the station's antenna to project into homes. The signal's in the static. Route 88 isn't a road, it's a loop. Break the loop, break the signal. If you're reading this, play the tape at 12:12 a.m. on March 3rd. The truth will broadcast. On March 3rd, 2010, Reyes and Aisha gathered at the station with a vintage cassette deck. At 12:12 a.m., they played the tape. The radio turned on by itself. A voice filled the room. Not Marcus's, but a child's. "He's in the walls. The signal took him. You have to unplug it all." They tore open the studio walls and found a nest of wires, spliced into the town's power grid. Following them led to a manhole cover stamped with a military insignia from the 1950s. Inside was a Cold War-era bunker, its walls lined with reel-to-reel tapes and a humming transmitter. The machine was still on, broadcasting a signal at 12.12 kHz, a frequency known to cause hallucinations. Marcus's final journal page lay on the console. I didn't disappear. I was rewritten. The signal, it edits reality. If you hear this, shut it down before it edits you. Reyes pulled the emergency switch and the transmitter died with a scream. The town's power flickered out. For a moment, the only sound was the rain. Then a voice crackled over the studio's PA system. Marcus's voice, clear and steady. Thank you, the loop is broken. The broadcast cut to static. In 2012, Iron Ridge tore down Station 12. The transmitter was dismantled, its components buried in a lead-lined box. But every March 3rd, at 12:12 a.m., truckers on Route 88 report hearing a faint voice on their radios. Midnight echoes, signing off. Marcus's case was closed as presumed deceased, though no body was ever found. Aisha wrote a book about the investigation, which became a cult classic. Detective Reyes retired in 2020, her final case file marked with a single note. Some mysteries aren't meant to be solved, just silenced. Story 6, The Muralist of Hollow Creek. In the fall of 1998, the industrial town of Hollow Creek, Ohio, was a place of boarded-up factories and fading murals. The town's heartbeat was slow, its residents pragmatic, but one name sparked whispers: Elliot Voss, a reclusive street artist who'd appeared in 1996 and painted haunting, surreal scenes on abandoned buildings. His works were always unsigned but recognizable. A clock melting into a river, a child holding a key made of bones, a flock of crows spelling out coordinates in their flight. On November 5th, 1998, Elliot vanished. His studio, a rented garage on the edge of town, was found empty, save for a single sketch pinned to the wall, a tunnel lined with mirrors, its far end glowing red. The only clue was a phrase scrawled in chalk on the garage floor: "They know you see them." Detective Marcus Cole, a 42-year-old with a coffee addiction and a knack for lost causes, led the investigation. But Hollow Creek had bigger problems: a factory closure, rising crime. Elliot's case went cold within weeks. Then the murals began to change. In 2003, a teenager named Lila Torres noticed something odd. Elliot's old murals were altered. The clock now dripped into a street sign reading River Street. The key in the child's hand had grown teeth. Locals dismissed it as vandalism until Lila posted photos online. A Reddit thread exploded with theories. The changes mirrored missing persons cases in Hollow Creek since 1996. The coordinates in the Crow mural, originally dismissed as nonsense, pointed to a vacant lot downtown. The red glow in Elliot's final sketch matched the light from a storm drain near the river. Lila, now 19 and studying art history, partnered with Detective Cole, retired but haunted by the case, to investigate. They started with the coordinates. The vacant lot was unremarkable until they dug. Beneath a layer of concrete, they found a rusted iron hatch marked with a symbol from Elliot's murals, a serpent swallowing its tail. The hatch led to a tunnel. The tunnel was a relic of the 1800s, built to transport coal beneath Hollow Creek. Maps showed it had been sealed in 1952 after a collapse, but the group found it intact, its walls lined with more murals, paintings only Elliot could have made, scenes of faceless figures dragging bodies into mirrors, a woman clawing her way out of a painting. In a final panel, a man with Elliot's features, holding a flashlight labeled The Eye. At the tunnel's end was a chamber. Inside, a desk, a cot, and a stack of journals. Elliot's handwriting filled the pages. They're not ghosts, they're watchers. They live in the gaps, reflections, static, the corner of your eye. The town's founders knew them, buried them under mirrors. But the cracks spread. If you're reading this, the eye is still open. Break the glass. The eye was a mirror mounted on the chamber's far wall, its surface unnaturally dark. When Lila touched it, the glass rippled like water. Lila's viral TikTok series, The Muralist's Secret, caught the attention of Dr. Evelyn Marsh, a neuroscientist studying pareidolia, the brain's tendency to perceive patterns in randomness. Evelyn theorized Elliot's murals contain subliminal fractal patterns designed to prime viewers to notice anomalies, like the watchers Elliot described. Using UV lights and infrared scans, the team revisited Hollow Creek streets. They found hidden symbols in decades-old graffiti, all pointing to one location: the abandoned Hollow Creek Asylum, shuttered in 1975. Inside, they discovered a basement ward sealed with lead-lined doors. A patient log from the 1950s listed treatment for mirror-induced psychosis. One entry stood out. Subject 11, Jane Doe, insists the asylum's mirrors are portals. She's been moved to solitary. Jane Doe's description matched the woman in Elliot's mural. On October 31st, 2023, the 25th anniversary of Elliot's disappearance, Lila and Evelyn returned to the asylum. They shattered the lead seals and entered a forgotten ward. The walls were lined with cracked mirrors, each reflecting not the room, but other places. A snowy forest, a subway tunnel, a child's bedroom. At the center stood a full-length mirror, pristine. Elliot's journal reappeared in Lila's backpack, lost weeks earlier, its final page now filled with fresh writing. The Watchers feed on ignored truths. The asylum was their prison. The town's founders trapped them here, but the cracks spread. Break the eye, end the cycle. Lila swung a hammer. The mirror shattered, and the room filled with a sound like breaking glass and distant screams. When the noise faded, the mirrors were gone. The asylum walls were bare. Elliot's body was never found. Epilogue: The town that looked away. Hollow Creek demolished the asylum in 2024. The murals faded, their paint turning to dust overnight. Lila published a book about the case, but most reviewers dismissed it as urban legend. But locals swear, if you stare into a mirror at midnight, you'll see a flicker of movement. The wind sometimes hums a melody from Elliot's final sketch. And on foggy nights, a figure with Elliot's face can be seen painting a new mural on the old factory wall before vanishing into the bricks. Story 7, The Clockmaker's Labyrinth of 1999. In the fall of 1999, the town of Ravenswood, Ohio was a place where time seemed to stall. Its streets were lined with brick factories shuttered in the 80s, and its only thriving business was the Ravenswood Library, a 1920s Gothic relic staffed by 62-year-old librarian Eleanor Hart. But the town's heart was its clockmaker, Silas Grange, a reclusive 78-year-old who repaired pocket watches in a cluttered shop on Main Street. Silas was a fixture of Ravenswood. He'd arrived in 1947, speaking in riddles and wearing a gold pocket watch that never ticked. Locals said he'd fought in the war, but no one knew which one. On November 1st, 1999, Silas vanished. His shop was locked from the inside. The pocket watch was gone. The only clue? A single phrase carved into his workbench. The gears turn where the clock does not. Detective Marcus Cole, a 35-year-old with a taste for black coffee and crossword puzzles, led the investigation. He found no forced entry, no fingerprints, only a faint smell of oil and a map of Ravenswood's sewer system, dotted with red X's. The case made headlines for weeks. Then, like so many others, it faded into cold storage. In 2012, a college student named Lila Torres posted a 10-minute YouTube video titled The Ravenswood Clockmaker, A Century's Secret. Lila, a self-taught historian with a fascination for disappearances, had stumbled upon Silas's story while researching Ohio's unsolved cases. Her video pointed out a pattern. Every 50 years since 1849, a craftsman had vanished in Ravenswood, a blacksmith in 1899, a watchmaker in 1949, and now Silas. Each disappearance was preceded by the discovery of a strange object. 1849, a gear found in a farmer's field. 1899, a rusted key buried under the town hall. 1949, a clock face with no hands. 1999, a brass plaque etched with the phrase, "The gears turn where the clock does not." Lila's video went viral, sparking renewed interest. But the breakthrough came from Eleanor Hart, the librarian, who'd been quietly compiling Ravenswood's archives for decades. She contacted Lila with a revelation. The objects were all parts of a 19th century puzzle clock once displayed in the library. The clock had vanished in 1923, the same year the library's basement was sealed. Lila and Eleanor secured permission to explore the library's basement. They pried open the sealed door to find a cavernous space filled with forgotten relics, dusty encyclopedias, a broken organ, and, at the center, a towering contraption of gears and brass. It was the puzzle clock, a 12-foot tall machine covered in symbols, dials, and a single keyhole. Eleanor produced the rusted key from the 1949 discovery. It fit. With a creak, the clock's face split open, revealing a hidden compartment. Inside was a journal dated 1849, its pages filled with frantic handwriting. The town's founders built this machine to harness time itself. But the gears hunger. They chose craftsmen to maintain it. If one refuses, he vanishes. The clock demands tribute. I will not be its next victim. I've hidden the final piece beneath the church. Lila cross-referenced the journal with Ravenswood's records. The 1849 blacksmith had died in a forge fire the night after refusing a town commission. The 1949 watchmaker had been found catatonic, muttering about gears in the dark. The church was the next clue. The St. Agnes Church had been abandoned since the 70s. Lila and Eleanor pried open its cellar door to find a tunnel descending into the earth. The walls were lined with clocks, hundreds of them, all stopped at 3:33 a.m. The tunnel split into three paths, each marked by a symbol from the puzzle clock: a sun, a moon, and a serpent. Lila chose the serpent path, its walls sweating with condensation. The passage opened into a cavern, its ceiling studded with bioluminescent fungi. At its center was a pool of mercury, and floating atop it, Silas Grange's pocket watch. The watch ticked now. As Lila reached for it, Eleanor warned, "The journal said the clock demands tribute. If we take it, we might awaken something." But Lila grabbed the watch. The cavern trembled. The pool drained, revealing a stone door etched with the words, "To the gear maker, the price is time." Behind the door was the labyrinth, a maze of corridors lined with clocks, their hands spinning backward. In the heart of the maze stood a chamber filled with clocks set to different times. At the center was Silas, alive but aged decades overnight, his hands fused to the gears of a massive machine. Silas rasped out his story. The labyrinth was built in 1849 by Ravenswood's founders, who discovered a natural time node beneath the town. The machine regulated the node's energy, but it required a craftsman's touch. Every 50 years, the operator died or vanished, their body absorbed into the gears. "I tried to dismantle it," Silas whispered, "but the machine adapts. It pulled me here, made me its keeper." Lila and Eleanor found the final piece, a brass lever labeled reset. Pulling it would destroy the machine, but trap them in the labyrinth's time distortions forever. Eleanor hesitated. "If we shut it down, Ravenswood might unravel." Lila pulled the lever. The machine screamed, gears shattered, time fractured. When the dust settled, Lila and Eleanor were outside the church, dawn breaking. The labyrinth was gone, replaced by a crater filled with twisted metal. Silas's body was never found. Ravenswood began to change. The clocks in town started working again. The factory smokestacks crumbled. And on November 1st each year, a single pocket watch appears on the library's doorstep, its hands set to 3:33 a.m. Lila wrote a book about the case, but most dismissed it as folklore. Eleanor retired, her hair turned white overnight, and she spent her final years gardening in silence. The Ravenswood Library was demolished in 2020. Its archives moved to a modern building. But locals swear that on foggy nights, you can hear a faint ticking beneath the earth, a rhythm too precise to be natural. Story 8, The Willowbrook Station Mystery. The year was 1947, and America was settling into the rhythm of peacetime after the long years of war. In small towns across the country, life was beginning to feel normal again. Children played in tree-lined streets. Mothers hung laundry on backyard lines. And fathers returned home each evening on commuter trains that ran with clockwork precision through landscapes painted in the soft colors of hope and renewal. Willowbrook was one such town, nestled in the rolling hills of Pennsylvania, about 40 miles west of Philadelphia. It was the kind of place where everyone knew their neighbors, where the pharmacist remembered your children's names, and where the biggest excitement was usually the annual church bazaar or the high school football team's performance against their crosstown rivals. The Pennsylvania Railroad Station in Willowbrook was a modest brick building with white painted trim and window boxes that the station master's wife, Martha Henley, kept filled with seasonal flowers. Every morning and evening, the 7:15 and 5:45 trains would pull into the station with a gentle hiss of steam and the pleasant clatter of wheels on steel rails. bringing commuters to and from their jobs in the city. It was Martha who first noticed that something unusual was happening at the station, though it would be weeks before anyone understood the significance of what she observed. Martha had been the unofficial caretaker of the station's aesthetic details for nearly 15 years, ever since she married Tom Henley and moved into the small apartment above the station house. She took pride in keeping the waiting room clean and welcoming, with fresh flowers and current magazines for passengers who arrived early for their trains. In early October of 1947, Martha began finding small gifts left on the wooden benches in the waiting room. They appeared overnight, carefully placed and beautifully wrapped in brown paper tied with string. The first was a small bouquet of wildflowers, goldenrod, purple asters, and Queen Anne's lace, arranged with obvious care and left on the bench closest to the ticket window. Martha assumed initially that the flowers were meant for her, a kind gesture from one of the regular commuters who appreciated her efforts to keep the station pleasant. She placed them in a mason jar filled with water and set them on the counter, where their simple beauty brightened the entire waiting room. But the gifts continued to appear, and they seemed to be left not for Martha or Tom, but for the passengers themselves. Each morning, Martha would find something new: a small wrapped package containing homemade cookies, a thermos of coffee with a note saying, "For whoever needs warmth today," or a collection of magazines tied together with a ribbon, and a card reading, "For pleasant journeys." The gifts were always anonymous, always thoughtful, and always left during the night hours when the station was empty. Tom checked the building carefully each evening when he locked up, and there was never any sign of forced entry. Whoever was leaving these offerings had to have a key or know of another way into the building. As autumn deepened and the mystery continued, Martha began keeping a careful record of what appeared and when. Her notebook, filled with neat handwriting and pressed flowers from some of the bouquets, became a chronicle of anonymous kindness that touched the daily lives of Willowbrook's commuters. The gifts seemed to respond to the needs and moods of the community. On rainy mornings, waterproof covers for newspapers would appear. During a particularly cold spell in November, hand-knitted scarves were left draped over the bench backs, each with a small tag saying, "Please take if you need warmth." When Mrs. Eleanor Fitzgerald was recovering from surgery and struggling to manage her daily commute to her job at the telephone company, she found a small cushion wrapped in cheerful fabric left on her usual seat, with a note saying, "For comfort during difficult times." The mystery deepened when similar gifts began appearing at other locations throughout Willowbrook. The public library found new books donated anonymously, always volumes that filled gaps in their collection or addressed current interests in the community. The elementary school discovered art supplies left by their back door, enough for an entire semester of children's projects. The Methodist Church found their garden weeded and their walkway swept, with no evidence of who had done the work. Rather than creating anxiety or suspicion, these mysterious acts of kindness began to transform the atmosphere of the entire town. People started talking to each other more, sharing speculation about their anonymous benefactor, and expressing gratitude for the unexpected gifts that brightened their daily routines. Dr. James Morrison, Willowbrook's only physician, was among those who began to pay closer attention to the pattern of gifts and kindnesses. As someone who knew the intimate details of many families' struggles, who was ill, who was grieving, who was facing financial hardship, he began to notice that the anonymous gifts seemed to appear exactly when and where they would do the most good. When the Kowalski family lost their father in an industrial accident, their mailbox began receiving unmarked envelopes containing grocery money. When old Mr. Henderson broke his hip and couldn't maintain his garden, someone began tending his vegetable patch during the night hours, ensuring that his winter stores of canned goods would be adequate. When the high school drama club couldn't afford costumes for their spring production, a large box of theatrical clothing appeared in the school auditorium, complete with alterations that fit the cast members perfectly. The precision and thoughtfulness of these interventions suggested someone with intimate knowledge of the community's needs and the resources to address them meaningfully. Dr. Morrison began to suspect that their mysterious benefactor was not only someone who lived in Willowbrook, but someone whose position gave them access to information about people's private circumstances. The breakthrough came in December, during the week before Christmas, when Martha Henley decided to solve the mystery through patient observation rather than direct confrontation. She had noticed that the gifts at the train station seemed to appear most frequently on Tuesday and Thursday nights, and she suspected that the timing was related to some regular schedule or routine. On a cold Tuesday evening, Martha positioned herself at the small window in the apartment above the station, wrapped in a quilt and armed with a thermos of hot cocoa and her husband's binoculars. She had told Tom about her plan, and he had agreed to help by ensuring that the waiting room remained unlocked and that the building appeared as it normally did during the night hours. Just after midnight, Martha saw a figure approaching the station from the direction of Main Street. The person moved carefully through the shadows, clearly familiar with the layout of the building and grounds. Martha watched as the figure produced a key and entered the waiting room, emerging about 10 minutes later, empty-handed. The next morning, Martha found a collection of hand warmers on the waiting room benches, along with a thermos of hot chocolate and a note reading, "For those who must travel on cold mornings." But more importantly, she had recognized the figure she had seen the night before. The mysterious benefactor was revealed to be Miss Dorothy Ashford, Willowbrook's head librarian and one of the most respected members of the community. Dorothy was 53 years old, a woman who had never married but had devoted her life to serving others through her work at the library and her involvement in numerous civic organizations. Martha's discovery presented her with a delicate dilemma. Dorothy's anonymous acts of kindness were clearly bringing joy and comfort to many people in the community. To reveal her identity might end these acts of generosity, either because Dorothy would feel exposed and embarrassed, or because the magic of anonymous giving would be lost. Martha decided to approach Dorothy directly, privately, and with the respect due someone who had been giving so generously of herself. She invited Dorothy for tea on a quiet Saturday afternoon, ostensibly to discuss the library's request for new books, but actually to address what she had witnessed. The conversation that followed revealed a story both simple and profound. Dorothy had inherited a modest sum of money from an elderly aunt several years earlier. Rather than using the inheritance for personal luxuries, she had decided to invest it in ways that would benefit her community. But Dorothy was a private person who believed that the most meaningful gifts were those given without expectation of recognition or gratitude. "I've lived in Willowbrook my entire life," Dorothy explained to Martha over cups of Earl Grey tea and fresh-baked scones. "I've watched children grow up, families struggle and succeed, people face hardship and find joy. I know this community intimately, and I know that small gestures of kindness can make enormous differences in people's lives." Dorothy had developed her system of anonymous giving carefully. She used her position at the library to stay informed about community needs, who was struggling with illness, unemployment, or family difficulties. She observed people's routines and habits, understanding when and where small acts of kindness would have the greatest impact. And she had cultivated relationships with local businesses and suppliers that allowed her to provide exactly what was needed when it was needed most. The key to the train station had come from Tom Henley himself, though he didn't know it. Years earlier, when Dorothy was organizing a community celebration, Tom had given her a spare key to use for decorating the waiting room. Dorothy had quietly had a copy made and had never mentioned that she still possessed it. Martha listened to Dorothy's explanation with growing admiration for the thoughtfulness and generosity that had motivated months of secret kindness. But she also understood that Dorothy's anonymity was important to her, and that revealing her identity publicly would violate something essential about the nature of her giving. The two women reached an understanding that would preserve Dorothy's anonymity while ensuring that her acts of kindness could continue. Martha would become Dorothy's unofficial assistant, helping to identify needs in the community and providing feedback about how the gifts were received and appreciated. This partnership allowed Dorothy's generosity to become even more targeted and effective. Martha's daily interactions with commuters gave her insights into their needs and circumstances that complemented Dorothy's broader community knowledge. Together, they developed a network of anonymous kindness that touched virtually every family in Willowbrook in some way. The mystery of the anonymous benefactor was never officially solved, though various community members developed their own theories and suspicions. Some suspected Dr. Morrison, reasoning that his knowledge of family circumstances would explain the precision of the gifts. Others thought it might be one of the wealthier families in town, perhaps the Steinbergs who owned the department store, or the Washingtons who had investments in Philadelphia real estate. A few perceptive individuals began to suspect Dorothy, noting that she seemed unusually well-informed about community needs and that her suggestions for addressing various problems were often remarkably practical and well thought out. But Dorothy's reputation as someone who lived modestly on a librarian's salary made it difficult for people to believe that she had the resources for such extensive generosity. The anonymous gifts continued throughout the late 1940s and into the 1950s, evolving with the changing needs of the community. As veterans returned from the war and started families, baby items began appearing for young mothers. As teenagers graduated from high school and prepared for college or careers, scholarships and job references materialized from unnamed sources. As elderly residents faced increasing health challenges, medical supplies and comfort items appeared exactly when they were needed most. Dorothy's methodology became increasingly sophisticated over the years. She developed relationships with suppliers in Philadelphia who could provide specialized items or services. She learned to coordinate her giving with seasonal needs and community events. She even began collaborating informally with other community organizations, though they never knew they were working with their mysterious benefactor. The partnership between Dorothy and Martha also deepened into a genuine friendship built around their shared commitment to community service. Martha began contributing her own resources to the effort, using her position at the train station to gather information and distribute gifts more effectively. The two women developed a system of subtle communication that allowed them to coordinate their efforts without arousing suspicion. One of the most touching aspects of Dorothy's story was her attention to the emotional and spiritual needs of the community, not just material necessities. During the difficult winter of 1948, when several families faced serious hardships, Dorothy began leaving small notes of encouragement along with her practical gifts. These messages, written in carefully disguised handwriting, offered hope and reassurance to people who were struggling with loss, illness, or financial difficulty. Remember that difficult times pass and that you are valued by people who may never tell you so directly, read one note left with a basket of groceries for the widow Mrs. Patterson. Your kindness to others creates ripples of good that spread further than you know, said another, accompanying a small gift for Mr. Chen, who had been helping elderly neighbors with their shopping despite his own limited resources. These notes became treasured possessions for many recipients, kept in jewelry boxes and dresser drawers as reminders that someone cared about their welfare and recognized their efforts to contribute positively to the community. As the 1950s progressed and Willowbrook grew and changed, Dorothy's approach to anonymous giving evolved as well. The community's needs became more complex as suburban development brought new families with different backgrounds and expectations. Dorothy adapted by expanding her network of information sources and developing new methods for identifying and addressing emerging needs. She began collaborating more extensively with community organizations, though still maintaining her anonymity. The Parent-Teacher Association found that their fundraising efforts were mysteriously supplemented by anonymous donations that allowed them to achieve their goals for playground equipment and library books. The volunteer fire department discovered that their equipment fund grew steadily through unmarked contributions that appeared to anticipate their needs for new gear and training resources. Dorothy also began mentoring other potential philanthropists, though they rarely realized that their conversations with the knowledgeable librarian were actually guidance sessions on effective community giving. Young professionals who expressed interest in contributing to local causes found themselves directed towards specific opportunities and provided with practical advice on how to make their contributions most effective. The success of Dorothy's approach to anonymous giving began to influence the culture of Willowbrook itself. People became more attentive to their neighbors' needs and more willing to offer help, inspired by the example of generosity they witnessed regularly, even though they didn't know its source. The community developed a tradition of paying kindness forward, with recipients of anonymous gifts often becoming anonymous givers themselves. This multiplication effect meant that by the mid-1950s, it was impossible to determine which acts of kindness originated with Dorothy and which were inspired by her example but carried out by others. The culture of anonymous giving had become self-sustaining, creating a network of mutual support that extended far beyond what one person, no matter how generous, could have achieved alone. Martha's role in this network also evolved over the years. As she and Tom raised their own family, two daughters who grew up witnessing their mother's commitment to community service, Martha became a bridge between Dorothy's systematic approach to philanthropy and the more spontaneous acts of kindness that characterized Willowbrook's growing culture of mutual support. The train station remained a focal point for community connection, with Martha's flower arrangements and Dorothy's anonymous gifts, creating an atmosphere of welcome that made the daily commute feel less like a chore and more like participation in a caring community. Passengers began leaving their own small gifts for fellow travelers, shared newspapers, homemade treats, or simply friendly notes that brightened someone's journey. One of the most significant tests of the anonymous giving network came during the economic recession of 1958, when several local businesses closed and unemployment rose sharply throughout the region. Dorothy and Martha faced the challenge of addressing more extensive and serious needs while maintaining the delicate balance that kept their network functioning effectively. Dorothy responded by organizing what she privately called the Winter Campaign, a coordinated effort that addressed not just immediate material needs, but the psychological and social challenges that accompanied economic hardship. Anonymous gifts during this period included not just food and clothing, but items that help maintain dignity and hope, job search resources, professional clothing for interviews, and small luxuries that reminded recipients that they were valued beyond their economic circumstances. The network's response to the recession demonstrated how deeply the culture of anonymous giving had taken root in Willowbrook. People who had previously been recipients became contributors, offering whatever resources they could spare to help their neighbors weather the difficult times. The multiplication effect that Dorothy had fostered created a resilience that helped the community survive the recession, with its social fabric intact and its spirit of mutual support actually strengthened. As Dorothy entered her 60s, she began to consider how to ensure that her work would continue beyond her own lifetime. She had never married or had children, and her estate planning required careful thought about how to preserve both the resources and the philosophy that had made her anonymous giving so effective. Working with a trusted lawyer in Philadelphia, someone who knew about her philanthropic activities but respected her desire for anonymity, Dorothy established a foundation that would continue her work according to the principles she had developed over nearly 2 decades of community giving. The foundation's board included Martha Henley and several other community members who had demonstrated understanding of Dorothy's approach, though most of them never knew that they were continuing the work of their beloved librarian. The transition from Dorothy's personal giving to the foundation's systematic philanthropy was managed so carefully that most community members never realized that anything had changed. The anonymous gifts continued to appear when and where they were needed most. The community culture of mutual support continued to flourish, and Willowbrook maintained its reputation as a place where people looked out for each other in both obvious and subtle ways. Dorothy Ashford passed away peacefully in 1967 at the age of 73, having devoted the last 20 years of her life to demonstrating that one person's commitment to anonymous generosity could transform an entire community's understanding of what it meant to be good neighbors. Her funeral was attended by virtually everyone in Willowbrook, though most of them came to mourn the loss of a dedicated librarian and community volunteer, not knowing that they were also saying goodbye to the anonymous benefactor whose gifts had touched their lives in countless ways over the years. Martha Henley, by then a grandmother and one of Willowbrook's most respected community leaders, delivered one of the eulogies at Dorothy's funeral. Her remarks focused on Dorothy's visible contributions to the community, her work at the library, her involvement in civic organizations, her mentorship of young people. But those who knew the full story could hear deeper meanings in Martha's words about Dorothy's quiet generosity and her belief that the most meaningful gifts are those given without expectation of recognition. The mystery of Willowbrook's anonymous benefactor was never officially solved, though over the years various community members developed educated guesses about Dorothy's role in the network of kindness that had shaped their town's character. Some of these suspicions were confirmed when the foundation's work became more public in later decades, but by then Dorothy's anonymous giving had inspired so many others that the original source of the community's culture of mutual support had become less important than its continuation. The Willowbrook station continued to serve commuters for many more years, with Martha's flower arrangements and the community's tradition of small kindnesses, making it a symbol of what public spaces could become when people committed themselves to caring for each other's welfare. The station was eventually closed when train service to the area ended in the 1980s, but the building was preserved as a community center, with plaques honoring both Tom and Martha Henley for their decades of service to travelers and neighbors alike. The story of Dorothy Ashford and the Willowbrook Station mystery illustrates how individual acts of anonymous generosity can create lasting changes in community culture. Dorothy's commitment to giving without recognition not only addressed immediate needs, but inspired others to adopt similar approaches to neighbor helping neighbor, creating a multiplication effect that extended her impact far beyond what she could have achieved through her own resources alone. The mystery was solved not through investigation or exposure, but through the gradual recognition that the most important question was not who was giving anonymously, but how to ensure that the spirit of anonymous giving continued to flourish. Dorothy's success lay not just in her individual acts of kindness, but in her ability to demonstrate that ordinary people in ordinary communities could create extraordinary cultures of mutual support and care. The legacy of the Willowbrook Station mystery lives on in the foundation that continues Dorothy's work and in the community traditions that still encourage people to look out for each other in both visible and invisible ways. It serves as a reminder that the most profound mysteries are sometimes not crimes to be solved, but examples of human goodness to be understood, appreciated, and continued. In the end, the mystery of who was leaving anonymous gifts at the train station revealed itself to be a story about how one person's decision to give generously and anonymously could inspire an entire community to become more caring, more attentive to each other's needs, and more committed to the idea that everyone deserves both practical support and the knowledge that their welfare matters to others. The gentle clatter of trains no longer echoes through Willowbrook, and the station's waiting room no longer hosts early morning commuters, warming themselves with anonymous gifts of coffee and kindness. But the spirit that Dorothy Ashford fostered through 20 years of anonymous giving continues to influence how people in that community think about their responsibilities to each other, proving that the most lasting solutions to human problems are often found not in dramatic interventions, but in the patient, persistent practice of ordinary generosity offered without expectation of recognition or reward. Story 9. The Broadcaster. The summer of 1946 brought more than just warm evenings and fireflies to the rolling hills of southeastern Ohio. It brought what local newspapers would later call the Great Radio Mystery, though those who lived through it remembered it more fondly as the summer when the airwaves themselves seemed to develop a conscience. WKNT, broadcasting from the modest industrial city of Millfield, was typical of the small-town radio stations that dotted America's landscape in the years immediately following the war. The station operated from the second floor of the Hartwell Building on Main Street, its modest studios overlooking a downtown that was slowly coming back to life as soldiers returned home and factories transitioned from wartime production to peacetime goods. The station's owner and primary broadcaster was Franklin Pierce Morrison, a man whose name seemed too grand for his humble circumstances, but whose voice had become as familiar to local residents as the whistle of the evening freight train. Frank, as everyone called him, had purchased the struggling station in 1943 with money saved from his previous career as a traveling salesman, and he had slowly built WKNT into something approaching profitability through a combination of local advertising, farming reports, and the kind of personal touch that made listeners feel like Frank was speaking directly to them from their kitchen radios. The mystery began on a Tuesday evening in June, during what should have been dead air. WKNT's broadcast day typically ended at 10 o'clock with Frank's "Good Night, Ohio Valley" sign-off, followed by the playing of the national anthem, and then silence until the next morning's farm report at 5:30. The Federal Communications Commission required stations to observe these quiet hours, and Frank was meticulous about following regulations that kept his broadcasting license secure. But on this particular Tuesday, residents throughout Millfield and the surrounding farming communities began reporting that WKNT was broadcasting again sometime after midnight. The programming was unlike anything the station had ever offered during its regular hours. Classical music played with obvious care and knowledge, poetry readings in a voice that was cultured but not familiar, and thoughtful discussions of books, art, and philosophy that seemed designed for listeners who couldn't sleep rather than those seeking entertainment. Mrs. Agnes Whitmore, an elderly widow who suffered from insomnia and often listened to distant radio stations during the lonely hours before dawn, was among the first to document these mysterious broadcasts. Her careful notes, written in the margins of her daily planner, recorded program content that seemed impossible for a small-town station like WKNT to produce. June 18th, approximately 12:30 a.m., she wrote in her precise handwriting, "Beautiful performance of Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major, followed by reading from Wordsworth's Lines written a few miles above Tintern Abbey. Reader has educated voice, possibly East Coast origins. Discusses meaning of poem with intelligence and genuine feeling." Agnes had been a high school English teacher for 40 years before her retirement, and her assessments of the midnight programming revealed content that was not only sophisticated, but carefully planned to create a sense of peace and contemplation. The mysterious broadcaster seemed to understand that late-night listeners might be struggling with loneliness, worry, or the kind of restless thoughts that keep people awake despite their exhaustion. Frank Morrison was initially skeptical of reports about these midnight broadcasts. His radio equipment was locked securely each night, and he possessed the only keys to the station. The building's elderly night watchman, Henry Kowalski, made regular rounds and had never reported any unusual activity. Frank's first assumption was that listeners were picking up signals from distant stations and mistaking them for WKNT's programming. But as reports continued and multiplied, Frank began to investigate more seriously. He started staying late at the station, monitoring his equipment and checking for any signs of unauthorized use. What he discovered was both puzzling and slightly unsettling. His equipment showed clear signs of having been operated during the night hours, but there was no evidence of forced entry, no disruption of his careful filing system, and no indication that anything had been damaged or stolen. The breakthrough came when Frank decided to hide in the building overnight, positioning himself in the storage room adjacent to the main studio where he could observe without being seen. What he witnessed challenged his understanding not just of his own station, but of the community he thought he knew so well. At approximately 11:45 p.m., Frank heard the careful sound of footsteps on the stairs leading to the studio. A key turned in the lock, and a figure entered the broadcasting booth with obvious familiarity with the equipment and layout. Frank watched in amazement as the intruder, for lack of a better word, began preparing for a broadcast with the skill and confidence of an experienced radio professional. The mysterious broadcaster was revealed to be Dr. Edmund Fairchild, Millfield's most respected physician, and a man Frank had known casually for several years. Dr. Fairchild was in his early 60s, a widower who had served the community with distinction for nearly 3 decades. He was known for his gentle bedside manner, his extensive personal library, and his reputation as someone who could discuss literature and philosophy with the same expertise he brought to medical diagnosis. Frank watched in fascination as Dr. Fairchild adjusted the microphone, queued up a carefully selected record, and began what was clearly a well-planned program. The doctor's voice, transformed by the intimacy of late-night radio, took on a quality that Frank had never heard during their daytime encounters: warm, reflective, and deeply considerate of his unseen audience's needs. "Good evening to those who find themselves wakeful in these quiet hours," Dr. Fairchild began, his words flowing with the practiced ease of someone who had been doing this for months. "Tonight we'll share some music that has brought me comfort during difficult times, along with words from poets who understood that sleeplessness is often the soul's way of asking for beauty and contemplation." Frank found himself drawn into the program despite his position as an unwilling eavesdropper. Dr. Fairchild's approach to late-night broadcasting was unlike anything Frank had experienced in his own radio career. There was no effort to entertain or excite, no commercial interruptions, or weather reports. Instead, the doctor created a gentle atmosphere of shared solitude, speaking to his listeners as if they were old friends gathering around a fireplace for quiet conversation. The music selections revealed someone with deep knowledge and genuine appreciation for classical compositions, particularly pieces that conveyed serenity and emotional depth. Between musical interludes, Dr. Fairchild read poetry and excerpts from literature with the interpretive skill of someone who had spent years thinking about the meaning and beauty of language. But perhaps most remarkably, the doctor occasionally addressed specific situations that his listeners might be facing. Without mentioning names or revealing confidential information, he offered gentle counsel to those dealing with grief, worry about returning soldiers, the challenges of aging parents, or the simple loneliness that could make nighttime hours feel endless. For those of you caring for someone who has returned home changed by war, Dr. Fairchild said during one particularly moving segment, remember that healing happens slowly, like the gradual return of spring after a hard winter. Your patience and love create the conditions where recovery can take root, even when progress seems invisible from day to day. Frank realized that Dr. Fairchild was using his intimate knowledge of the community's struggles, gained through his medical practice, to offer comfort and guidance that he couldn't provide during regular office visits. The midnight broadcasts had become a form of therapy, not just for individual listeners, but for the entire community as it worked through the complex emotions of the post-war transition. When the program ended around 2 a.m. with a gentle reminder that tomorrow brings new possibilities for those willing to meet them with hope, Frank faced a decision that would define his relationship not just with Dr. Fairchild, but with his understanding of what radio broadcasting could accomplish. Rather than confronting the doctor immediately, Frank chose to return the following night and listen to another complete program. What he heard convinced him that Dr. Fairchild's unauthorized broadcasts were providing something that the community desperately needed, a form of comfort and connection that couldn't be obtained through conventional daytime programming. Frank's second night of observation revealed the careful preparation that went into each midnight broadcast. Dr. Fairchild arrived with a leather satchel containing carefully annotated books of poetry, handwritten notes about musical selections, and what appeared to be a loosely structured plan for each evening's programming. The doctor clearly took his unauthorized broadcasting seriously, treating it as a responsibility rather than a hobby. The following morning, Frank approached Dr. Fairchild privately, requesting a conversation that wouldn't compromise either man's reputation. They met at the doctor's home, a comfortable Victorian house filled with books and classical recordings that reflected the same sophisticated tastes evident in the midnight broadcasts. Dr. Fairchild's explanation for his nighttime radio activities was both simple and profound. As a physician, he had become increasingly aware of how many community members were struggling with insomnia, anxiety, and the kind of spiritual restlessness that couldn't be treated with traditional medical approaches. The war years had been particularly difficult, with families worrying about loved ones overseas and the entire community living under the stress of uncertainty and sacrifice. I began to realize that many of my patients needed something I couldn't provide during office visits, Dr. Fairchild explained to Frank over cups of carefully brewed coffee. They needed time to process their emotions, to find beauty and meaning in the midst of difficulty, to feel less alone during those dark hours when worries seem largest and hope feels most distant. The doctor had discovered that WKNT's signal carried clearly throughout the farming communities surrounding Millfield, reaching isolated homesteads where people might not have access to other forms of cultural programming or emotional support. His medical training had taught him to observe symptoms and needs that others might overlook, and he had recognized that the community was suffering from what he privately called spiritual malnutrition, a lack of access to the kind of art, literature, and thoughtful conversation that nourished the human spirit. Dr. Fairchild had obtained a key to the radio station through perfectly legitimate means. Frank had given it to him months earlier when the doctor had volunteered to record public service announcements about health and safety topics. The doctor had simply never returned the key, and Frank had never asked for it back. I knew I was using your equipment without permission, Dr. Fairchild admitted. I told myself it was a form of community service, like the house calls I make without charging families who can't afford to pay. But I understand that I was also taking advantage of your trust and potentially jeopardizing your broadcast license. Frank found himself in an unusual position. Dr. Fairchild's unauthorized broadcasts were clearly popular with listeners. The station had received more positive mail in the past month than in the entire previous year. But the Federal Communications Commission took a dim view of unlicensed programming, and Frank's business could be destroyed if the authorities discovered that his station was being used for unauthorized broadcasts. The solution they developed was both innovative and mutually beneficial. Frank proposed that Dr. Fairchild's midnight programs become an official part of WKNT's broadcast schedule. The doctor would be listed as a volunteer host for a late-night cultural program, giving the broadcast legal status while preserving their unique character and approach. This arrangement required Frank to extend his station's operating hours and obtain permission from the FCC for late-night programming. But it also opened up new possibilities for advertising revenue from businesses that wanted to reach the insomnia audience. More importantly, it allowed Dr. Fairchild to continue providing a service that was clearly meeting real community needs. The transition from unauthorized to official broadcasting was managed carefully to preserve what made the midnight programs special. Dr. Fairchild retained complete editorial control over content, ensuring that the programs maintained their contemplative quality and avoided the commercial pressures that might compromise their therapeutic value. Frank's role became that of technical support and gentle guidance, helping Dr. Fairchild improve his broadcasting technique while respecting the doctor's instincts about what his audience needed. The two men developed a professional partnership that combined Frank's radio expertise with Dr. Fairchild's understanding of human nature and community needs. The official announcement of the Midnight Reflections program was made in July 1946, with local newspapers describing it as an innovative approach to late-night broadcasting designed for listeners who appreciated classical music, poetry, and thoughtful discussion. The announcement carefully avoided mentioning that the program had been broadcasting unofficially for several weeks, presenting it instead as a new venture inspired by community interest in cultural programming. The response to the official program exceeded both men's expectations. Letters arrived from throughout southeastern Ohio and neighboring counties, with listeners expressing gratitude for programming that addressed their intellectual and emotional needs, rather than simply providing entertainment. Many writers mentioned that the midnight broadcasts had helped them through difficult periods of grief, illness, or family stress. One letter from a farming family near the West Virginia border particularly touched both Frank and Dr. Fairchild. "Our son came home from the Pacific last month, and he's been having terrible nightmares that keep the whole family awake. Your midnight program has become our family time. We gather around the radio and listen together, and somehow the music and poetry help all of us feel more peaceful. Thank you for understanding that healing happens slowly and that beauty can be medicine." As the program gained popularity, Dr. Fairchild began receiving requests for specific types of content. Families dealing with loss asked for particular poems or musical pieces that had brought them comfort. Students preparing for college entrance exams requested discussions of literature and philosophy. Even other physicians began writing to ask about Dr. Fairchild's approach to using art and music as therapeutic tools. The success of Midnight Reflections began to influence WKNT's daytime programming as well. Frank found that listeners who discovered the station through the late-night cultural program were also interested in more thoughtful daytime content. He began incorporating more educational programming, book discussions, and interviews with local experts on various topics. Dr. Fairchild's influence extended beyond the radio station to the broader community's cultural life. His broadcasts introduced many listeners to classical music, poetry, and literature they might never have encountered otherwise. The local library reported increased circulation of the books and poetry collections that Dr. Fairchild discussed on his programs. The high school's English and music teachers began incorporating some of his selections into their curricula. The doctor also began using his radio platform to encourage community involvement in cultural activities. He promoted local concerts, art exhibitions, and literary discussions, helping to create an audience for cultural events that might otherwise have struggled to find support in a small industrial town. One of the most significant developments was the formation of what became known as the Midnight Circle, a loose network of regular listeners who began meeting informally to discuss the books, music, and ideas introduced on Dr. Fairchild's program. These gatherings started in people's homes, but eventually grew into a regular monthly meeting held at the public library. The Midnight Circle included people from all walks of life: farmers and factory workers, teachers and shopkeepers, young mothers and elderly retirees, united by their appreciation for the kind of thoughtful conversation and cultural exploration that Dr. Fairchild promoted. The group became a significant force in the community's cultural development, organizing concerts, lecture series, and book clubs that continued for many years. Dr. Fairchild's approach to broadcasting also began to influence other small-town radio stations throughout the region. Word of WKNT's successful late-night cultural programming spread through professional networks, and other station owners began experimenting with similar formats. Some recruited local educators, ministers, or librarians to host thoughtful late-night programs designed for listeners seeking more than conventional entertainment. This regional influence led to Dr. Fairchild being invited to speak at broadcasting conferences about the potential for radio to serve educational and therapeutic functions. His presentations, delivered with the same gentle authority that characterized his midnight broadcasts, encouraged other broadcasters to think more creatively about how they could serve their community's deeper needs. The partnership between Frank and Dr. Fairchild also evolved into a genuine friendship based on mutual respect for each other's expertise and shared commitment to serving their community. Frank learned to appreciate literature and classical music through his association with the doctor, while Dr. Fairchild gained understanding of the technical and business aspects of broadcasting that helped him become a more effective communicator. Their collaboration became a model for how commercial broadcasting and community service could be combined beneficially. Frank's station remained profitable while providing programming that served genuine community needs, demonstrating that small-town radio could be both commercially successful and culturally significant. As Midnight Reflections entered its second year, Dr. Fairchild began to document the positive effects he observed in his medical practice. Patients who mentioned listening to the program seemed to cope better with chronic conditions, showed less anxiety about medical procedures, and reported improved sleep patterns even beyond the hours when the program was actually broadcasting. The doctor theorized that exposure to beauty and thoughtful reflection was providing what he called emotional nutrition, nourishment for aspects of human nature that were often neglected in the practical demands of daily life. His informal research into the therapeutic effects of cultural programming began attracting attention from medical colleagues who were interested in holistic approaches to patient care. This medical dimension of the program led to Dr. Fairchild occasionally addressing health topics during his broadcasts, though always from the perspective of overall wellness rather than specific medical advice. He discussed the connections between mental and physical health, the importance of beauty and creativity in human life, and the role of community connection in individual well-being. These health-focused segments were particularly appreciated by listeners in rural areas who might not have regular access to medical information or who were dealing with family health challenges without adequate support systems. Dr. Fairchild's gentle, non-alarming approach to health education helped many people become more proactive about their care while avoiding the anxiety that medical information sometimes generated. The program's influence on community health became evident during the severe flu outbreak of winter 1947 to 48. Dr. Fairchild used his midnight broadcast to provide calm, accurate information about prevention and treatment, while also offering the kind of emotional support that helped people cope with illness and worry about family members. The community's response to the health crisis was notably calm and well-organized, with many people crediting the Midnight program's influence on their ability to handle the situation effectively. As the 1940s drew to a close, Midnight Reflections had become an institution in southeastern Ohio, with listeners in surrounding states writing to express their appreciation for programming they could receive when atmospheric conditions were favorable. The program had demonstrated that there was a significant audience for thoughtful, culturally sophisticated radio content, even in small town and rural areas that were often overlooked by major networks. Dr. Fairchild's unauthorized broadcasting had evolved into something much larger than either he or Frank had originally envisioned. What began as one man's desire to provide comfort to sleepless neighbors had become a regional cultural institution that influenced how other broadcasters thought about their responsibilities to their communities. The mystery of the phantom broadcaster was solved not through investigation or enforcement, but through the recognition that unauthorized activity was actually providing a valuable community service that deserved official support rather than punishment. The resolution demonstrated how flexibility and creative problem-solving could transform a potential crisis into an opportunity for innovation and community benefit. Frank Morrison's willingness to work with Dr. Fairchild, rather than simply reporting him to authorities, showed how small-town relationships and mutual respect could create solutions that served everyone's interests. The doctor's commitment to continuing his broadcasts through official channels demonstrated his genuine concern for community welfare rather than personal recognition. The partnership between the two men became a lasting friendship that continued until Dr. Fairchild's retirement from both medicine and broadcasting in the early 1960s. By then, Midnight Reflections had inspired similar programs throughout the Midwest, and Dr. Fairchild's approach to therapeutic broadcasting was being studied by researchers interested in the connections between media, culture, and public health. When Dr. Fairchild finally retired from his midnight broadcasts, the program continued under other hosts who had been trained in his approach. But regular listeners always remembered the original phantom broadcaster whose unauthorized kindness had grown into an institution that served their community for more than 15 years. The story of Dr. Fairchild and WKNT illustrates how individual acts of service, even when technically unauthorized, can create positive changes that extend far beyond their original scope. The doctor's midnight broadcast demonstrated that radio could be more than entertainment or information. It could be a form of community therapy that addressed human needs for beauty, thoughtfulness, and connection. The mystery was solved not through exposure or punishment, but through collaboration and the recognition that community service could take many forms, including ones that initially appeared to violate conventional rules and procedures. The resolution showed how creativity and mutual respect could transform potential conflicts into partnerships that serve broader community interests. Today, WKNT continues to broadcast from Millfield, though the station's programming has evolved with changing times and technologies. A small plaque in the studio honors Dr. Edmund Fairchild's contribution to the station's history, commemorating the phantom broadcaster whose unauthorized kindness became a cornerstone of community cultural life. The story serves as a reminder that the most significant mysteries are sometimes not crimes to be solved, but acts of service to be understood and supported. Dr. Fairchild's midnight broadcast showed how one person's recognition of community needs could inspire creative solutions that benefited everyone involved, proving that unauthorized doesn't always mean unwelcome, and that the best solutions often emerge from unexpected collaborations between people committed to serving their neighbors' deeper needs. Story 10, The Road Phantom. The summer of 1974 was supposed to be a time of healing for America. The Vietnam War was winding down, Watergate was behind them, and the nation was trying to find its way back to normalcy. But in the heartland of Ohio, along the stretch of Interstate 77 that connected Cleveland to Columbus, a different kind of darkness was spreading. This is the story of a case that would challenge everything investigators thought they knew about serial crime and reveal the terrifying reality of how easily someone could vanish on America's highways. Detective Robert Bobby Walsh had been working homicide for the Cleveland Police Department for 8 years when the first case landed on his desk. It was a missing persons report that should have been routine, but something about it nagged at him from the very beginning. Jennifer Lynn Holbrook, 19 years old, had left her apartment in Cleveland Heights on the evening of June 15, 1974, to drive to Columbus for her sister's wedding. She was supposed to arrive by 10 p.m. for the rehearsal dinner. She never made it. Jennifer's car, a powder blue 1971 Volkswagen Beetle, was found 3 days later in the parking lot of a truck stop near Akron, about 40 miles south of Cleveland. The keys were still in the ignition. Her purse was on the passenger seat, money and credit cards untouched. But Jennifer was gone. "It doesn't make sense," Detective Walsh told his partner, Detective Maria Santos, as they examined the abandoned vehicle. "If someone wanted to rob her, why leave the money? If they wanted the car, why abandon it here?" The truck stop was a typical roadside establishment of the era. Fluorescent lights, chrome fixtures, and the constant hum of diesel engines. The owner, a gruff man named Carl Dennison, remembered seeing the Blue Beetle, but couldn't recall when it had first appeared in his lot. "Gets busy here, especially on weekends," Dennison explained, adjusting his trucker cap. "People come and go all hours. Could have been here for hours before anyone noticed." Detective Walsh interviewed the truck stop employees and several drivers who had been there over the past few days. But no one remembered seeing Jennifer or noticing anything unusual about the car's arrival. 3 weeks later, on July 8, 1974, another young woman disappeared under strikingly similar circumstances. Susan Marie Cortez, 22 years old, had been driving from Toledo to Cincinnati to visit her boyfriend. Her car, a red 1972 Chevrolet Nova, was found 2 days later at a rest stop along Interstate 71, about 50 miles north of Columbus. Like Jennifer's case, Susan's car was found with keys in the ignition and personal belongings untouched. She had simply vanished without a trace. Detective Walsh was called in to consult on the case due to the similarities. As he stood in the rest stop parking lot, examining Susan's car, he felt a chill that had nothing to do with the overcast July morning. Same MO, he told Detective Santos over the phone. Young woman traveling alone. Car found abandoned at a highway stop. But this time it's a different interstate, different jurisdiction. The Ohio Bureau of Criminal Investigation was brought in to coordinate between the various law enforcement agencies. Agent Patricia Coleman, a seasoned investigator who had worked on several multi-jurisdictional cases, was assigned to lead the task force. We're dealing with something we haven't seen before, Agent Coleman explained during the first task force meeting. If these cases are connected, our perpetrator is operating across a wide geographic area, using the interstate highway system to his advantage. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. The interstate highway system, completed just a few years earlier, had transformed American travel and commerce, but it had also created new opportunities for those with criminal intent. As summer turned to fall, the disappearances continued. Michelle Thompson, 24, vanished while driving from Youngstown to Dayton. Her car was found at a truck stop near Mansfield. Karen Williams, 21, disappeared en route from Lima to Portsmouth. Her vehicle was discovered at a rest area south of Columbus. Each case followed the same pattern: young women traveling alone on Ohio's interstate highways. Their cars found abandoned at highway stops with no signs of struggle or theft. The women had simply vanished. Detective Walsh found himself working 18-hour days, driving from one crime scene to another, trying to piece together a puzzle that seemed to have no solution. The cases were assigned to different jurisdictions, but he had unofficially made himself the coordinator, driven by a growing obsession with finding the connection. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Harold Winters, a long-haul trucker who regularly traveled the Ohio interstate system, approached police with information that would change the entire investigation. "I've been seeing the same guy at different stops," Winters told Detective Walsh during a meeting at a diner in Akron. "Tall guy, maybe 6'2", always wearing a baseball cap and sunglasses. Drives a brown van, older model, maybe late 60s. Thing is, I've seen him at 3 different places where those girls' cars were found." Winters was a careful observer, the kind of driver who noticed details others missed. He had been keeping a logbook of his travels, and his records showed that he had seen the mysterious man with the brown van at the truck stop where Jennifer's car was found, the rest stop where Susan's car was discovered, and the truck stop where Michelle's car was abandoned. "He's always alone, always parks away from the main areas," Winters continued. "Never seen him go into the restaurants or the stores. Just sits in his van, watching." Armed with this new information, Agent Coleman organized a surveillance operation unlike anything Ohio law enforcement had attempted before. Undercover officers were stationed at truck stops and rest areas throughout the state, watching for the brown van and its mysterious driver. The operation required careful coordination. The highway system covered hundreds of miles, and there were dozens of potential locations where the suspect might appear. Limited resources meant that they could only maintain surveillance at a fraction of the sites, but it was better than the reactive approach they had been forced to take. For 3 weeks, the surveillance yielded nothing. Then on October 23, 1974, Officer Jim Martinez, working undercover at a truck stop near Delaware, Ohio, spotted a brown van matching the description. The driver was a tall man wearing a baseball cap and sunglasses, exactly as Harold Winters had described. "Subject is here," Martinez radioed to the task force command center. "Brown van, Ohio plates, partial read is Charlie Delta 7. Driver matches description." The van was parked at the edge of the truck stop lot, away from the main traffic flow. The driver sat inside for nearly an hour, appearing to watch the other vehicles and their occupants. When a young woman pulled up in a small car and went inside the truck stop alone, the man in the van sat up straighter, paying close attention. Officer Martinez felt his heart rate increase. This was it. They were witnessing the predator in action. The decision to move in was made quickly. Agent Coleman was concerned that if they waited too long, they might lose the suspect, or worse, he might claim another victim. As the young woman returned to her car, several unmarked police vehicles converged on the brown van. The suspect, later identified as Thomas Eugene Hartwell, age 34, was arrested without incident. He was a quiet, unremarkable man who worked as a mechanic at a garage in Youngstown. He had no significant criminal record, just a few traffic violations and a domestic disturbance call from 1971. "I was just taking a break," Hartwell told Detective Walsh during the initial interview. "I like to drive around, see the country. Nothing wrong with that." But a search of Hartwell's van revealed a different story. Hidden beneath the floorboards was a collection of personal items that didn't belong to him. A driver's license belonging to Jennifer Holbrook, a bracelet that Susan Cortez's mother identified as belonging to her daughter, and a college ring that Michelle Thompson's boyfriend recognized immediately. More disturbing was a handwritten journal found in Hartwell's apartment. The journal contained detailed observations about targets, young women traveling alone on the highways. He had been watching them, studying their patterns, and planning his approaches for months. Over the course of several interviews, Thomas Hartwell gradually revealed the scope of his crimes. He had been prowling Ohio's highways for over a year, looking for vulnerable victims. His method was calculated and chilling in its simplicity. "I would watch them at the truck stops," he told Detective Walsh. "Young girls traveling alone, looking scared or tired. I'd follow them when they left, wait for the right moment." Hartwell's technique was to force women off the road by ramming their vehicles or boxing them in. He would then approach them under the pretense of offering help, claiming to be a good Samaritan who had witnessed an accident or mechanical problem. "They always trusted me at first," he said with disturbing calm. "I looked normal, sounded concerned. By the time they realized something was wrong, it was too late." The fate of the missing women was the hardest part of the investigation. Hartwell led police to several remote locations throughout Ohio where he had buried his victims. Jennifer Holbrook was found in a wooded area near Coshocton. Susan Cortez was discovered in a field outside of Marion. The others were located in similarly isolated spots, chosen for their remoteness and the likelihood that the remains would never be found. The trial of Thomas Eugene Hartwell began in March 1975 and lasted 6 weeks. The prosecution, led by District Attorney William Crawford, painted a picture of a calculated predator who had used America's highway system to hunt and kill innocent women. The evidence was overwhelming. In addition to the personal items found in Hartwell's van and the journal detailing his surveillance activities, investigators had discovered additional evidence linking him to the crimes. Tire tracks near where some of the bodies were found matched his van. Gas station receipts placed him in the vicinity of each disappearance. Perhaps most damning was Hartwell's own confession, given in chilling detail during police interviews. He showed no remorse for his actions, describing the murders as if they were routine mechanical tasks. He viewed these women as objects, Prosecutor Crawford told the jury during closing arguments. To him, they were not daughters, sisters, or friends. They were simply opportunities to satisfy his twisted desires. The defense attempted to argue that Hartwell was mentally ill, suffering from a personality disorder that made him unable to control his impulses. They brought in psychiatrists who testified about his troubled childhood and his inability to form normal relationships. However, the prosecution successfully demonstrated that Hartwell's crimes were premeditated and carefully planned. The journal, the surveillance activities, and the calculated method of operation all pointed to a man who knew exactly what he was doing. The verdict and aftermath. On April 28, 1975, the jury found Thomas Eugene Hartwell guilty on all counts: 5 charges of first-degree murder, multiple counts of kidnapping, and various other charges related to his crimes. He was sentenced to death in Ohio's electric chair. The case had a profound impact on law enforcement practices across Ohio and the Midwest. It was one of the first times that investigators had to deal with a serial killer who used the interstate highway system to hunt victims across multiple jurisdictions. Agent Patricia Coleman became a national expert on highway serial killers, working with the FBI to develop new investigative techniques for cases that crossed state lines. Her work would later prove invaluable in tracking other predators who used America's highways as their hunting ground. Detective Bobby Walsh was promoted to sergeant, and later became head of the Cleveland Police Department's Major Crimes Unit. He never forgot the case that changed his career and his understanding of criminal behavior. Before Hartwell, we thought about crime in terms of neighborhoods, of local problems, Walsh said years later. He showed us that evil could be mobile, that a killer could strike anywhere and disappear into the vast network of highways that connect our cities. Thomas Eugene Hartwell spent 4 years on death row, filing appeals and attempting to overturn his conviction. His lawyers argued that he had been mentally incompetent at the time of the crimes and that his confession had been coerced. All appeals were unsuccessful. On June 12, 1979, exactly 5 years after Jennifer Holbrook's disappearance, Thomas Hartwell was executed in the electric chair at the Ohio State Penitentiary in Columbus. His last words were reportedly an apology to the families of his victims, though some questioned the sincerity of his final statement. He had shown no remorse during his trial or the years leading up to his execution. The families of the victims had mixed reactions to the execution. Some felt that justice had been served, while others questioned whether Hartwell's death would bring them any real peace. "Nothing will bring Jennifer back," said Patricia Holbrook, Jennifer's mother, in a statement read by her attorney. "But maybe now other families won't have to go through what we've endured." The Highway Phantom case, as it came to be known in the media, highlighted the new challenges facing law enforcement in the 1970s. The completion of the interstate highway system had transformed American society, making travel faster and more convenient. But it had also created new opportunities for crime. The case led to improved communication between law enforcement agencies and the development of new investigative techniques for tracking criminals who operated across jurisdictional boundaries. It also resulted in increased security measures at highway rest stops and truck stops throughout Ohio. The disappearances along Ohio's highways stopped after Hartwell's arrest, confirming that investigators had caught the right man. However, the case served as a wake-up call about the vulnerability of travelers on America's highways. In the years following the case, similar crimes were reported in other states. The FBI began tracking what they called highway serial killers, predators who use the interstate system to hunt victims across wide geographic areas. Detective Walsh often reflected on the case and its impact on his career. "We learned that evil doesn't respect boundaries," he said. "It goes where it wants, when it wants. Our job is to be ready for it, no matter where it appears." The story of the Highway Phantom serves as a stark reminder of the dark side of America's transformation in the 1970s. The same highways that connected communities and facilitated commerce also provided new avenues for those with criminal intent. The 5 women who lost their lives to Thomas Hartwell's twisted desires were more than just statistics. Jennifer Holbrook had been studying to become a teacher. Susan Cortez was planning to marry her college sweetheart. Michelle Thompson was working toward a nursing degree. Karen Williams was an aspiring artist. Each had dreams, ambitions, and people who loved them. Their deaths were not in vain if they served to make the highways safer for future travelers. The investigative techniques developed during the Highway Phantom case would be used to catch other predators who thought they could use America's vast transportation network to hide their crimes. The case also demonstrated the importance of cooperation between different law enforcement agencies. Without the coordination provided by the Ohio Bureau of Criminal Investigation and the dedication of officers like Detective Walsh and Agent Coleman, Thomas Hartwell might have continued his killing spree indefinitely. In the end, the Highway Phantom case stands as a testament to the persistence of investigators who refused to give up, the bravery of witnesses like Harold Winters, who came forward with crucial information, and the resilience of communities that came together to demand justice for the victims. The brown van no longer prowls Ohio's highways, but the lessons learned from those terrifying months in 1974 continue to inform how law enforcement agencies track and apprehend serial killers who use the highways as their hunting ground. In a nation connected by ribbons of asphalt and concrete, vigilance and cooperation remain our best defenses against those who would prey upon the innocent travelers among us. The Highway Phantom was stopped, but his legacy lives on in the improved safety measures, investigative techniques, and interagency cooperation that emerged from one of Ohio's most chilling criminal cases. In remembering the victims and honoring those who brought their killer to justice, we ensure that their sacrifice was not in vain and that future travelers can journey America's highways with greater safety and peace of mind. So close your eyes. Let the hush of the night wrap around you. And know this: some stories don't end. They drift. They dream. They wait for you to listen again. Good night.